Dramatized in Christopher Nolan's epic Dunkirk, the Battle of Dunkirk was much more than just a firefight between the Axis powers and Allied forces of World War II. It was May 1940, and the actions of leaders and ordinary men helped decide which way the war was going to go. As the German army advanced through Holland, Luxembourg, and Belgium to march on France, things were looking dire for the British and French troops. The Allies retreated but were pinned against the French coast. Around 15,000 soldiers dug in to hold off hostile forces as boatloads of men were shuttled to safety. Those 15,000 souls saved more than 300,000 soldiers from certain death. The Maginot Line falls. In order to understand what pushed Allied forces into such dire circumstances in the first place, we need to go back to September 1939. According to the Telegraph, when Poland fell to German forces, Allied forces were powerless to stop it. Britain and France watched and waited, and there was an uneasy silence that lasted 7 months before Germany moved on France. Dividing the German and Allied forces on France's western border were 2 lines of fortifications, the German Siegfried Line and the French Maginot Line. The Maginot Line was a series of hundreds of buildings and 50-plus fortresses constructed in the 1930s to prevent Germany from invading as they'd done in World War I. The problem was that defenses tapered off at the Ardennes Forest between France and Belgium. When Belgium fell, around 1,500 German tanks stormed through the Ardennes Forest, bypassing the Maginot Line completely. Retreat to Dunkirk. History hasn't been kind to the French failure to stop the Germans as they marched across Europe, but the French did inflict heavy losses on the Germans when they poured into France north of the Maginot Line. Along with the British Expeditionary Force, they fought bravely to slow down the Germans. By the end of May, it was clear that the Allied forces were seriously outmanned and outgunned. According to the Telegraph, General Lord Gort, VC of the British Expeditionary Force, was faced with making the decision of continuing to fight against overwhelming odds, or evacuating the French and British troops in hopes of regrouping and fighting another day. He gave the order to retreat to the coast and try to evacuate from the port city of Dunkirk. The German halt. On May 24th, Hitler ordered his forces to halt just outside Dunkirk. Why? No one is 100% sure. The Allied army was bloody and beaten. And one of the greatest questions of the war is why Hitler didn't move in immediately to crush the remnants of the Allied army. One theory is that Hitler ordered a temporary ceasefire to give his troops time to rest, refuel, and regroup in preparation for the final push. By this time, they had been marching and fighting for a solid 2 weeks, and the army was exhausted. But while the ground troops rested, the Luftwaffe took to the skies to bomb the soldiers at Dunkirk. Impossible odds. As Allied troops dug into defensive positions on the French beach, British HQ was scrambling just across the English Channel. They had a massive evacuation to pull off and not long to organize it. The man who did it was Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay. He started planning the rescue, codenamed Operation Dynamo, on May 19th, and the ships were on their way on May 26th. But the Germans didn't intend to let the Allied troops evacuate easily. Shelling from above continued, and German bombers rained death down upon the men crammed into Dunkirk. Bombing was so fierce that Dunkirk's harbor was demolished on May 27th, creating another problem. With the harbor out of commission, larger ships were forced to wait out in deep waters, while smaller craft picked up soldiers and shuttled them out to sea in safety. As the evacuation started, 15,000 men, both French and British, set a perimeter around Dunkirk. They held back the advancing German troops on the ground, while the Royal Air Force squared off with the German planes. By the end, the RAF chalked up 377 kills and only 87 losses. Low expectations. In the face of the crushing German assault, Ramsay and the British command had to be realistic. They only expected to save 45,000 lives out of the 250,000 waiting on the beach. At first, even that seemed hopelessly optimistic. The first day, only 7,669 men were pulled from the Dunkirk beaches. On the second day, 17,804 more made it out. Later, ships honed in on 2 jetties that allowed 239,000 men to reach the safety of the large ships. By the time the evacuation was over, most estimates cite the final number of men rescued at around 338,000. Civilian help. To aid the evacuation, Ramsay and his men issued an order for all privately owned craft to join military service. And this mini fleet grew to include everything from fishing boats to yachts and steamers. They would become known as the Dunkirk Little Ships, and many of them still sail. In 2015, 50 of them made the trip from England to Dunkirk again for the 75th anniversary, carrying several soldiers who had been rescued by the little boats decades before. Not all of the civilian ships made it back, though. In 2015, the BBC covered a touching tribute to the Crested Eagle. The memorial wreath was laid by 98-year-old veteran Vic Vinner, whose brother was one of the 300 who died in the fiery blaze that sank the Crested Eagle. Catastrophic consequences. The evacuation of so many soldiers gave rise to the tale of the miracle at Dunkirk, but the operation came at a huge cost. Of the 933 ships that participated in the evacuation, 236 didn't return home, and another 61 were retired, and 1,000 Dunkirk citizens died alongside the soldiers, according to the BBC. History Extra reports that 68,000 BEF and 290,000 French soldiers died during the operation, compared to only 27,074 German deaths. Around 40,000 men were taken captive by the Germans, forced to march deep into German territory, and put to work in forced labor camps. Churchill called it a disaster. The successful evacuation of so many was, indeed, a miracle and a testament to the power of the human spirit. But at the same time the media was spinning Dunkirk as a miracle, Winston Churchill was cautious. When he gave a speech on June 4th, it was a rallying cry that made it clear the Allies were not done fighting. But he also acknowledged Dunkirk for what it was, a colossal military disaster. Maybe if the months preceding Dunkirk had gone differently, so many lives wouldn't have been lost. But when faced with no other option, the men who stayed behind on that beach sacrificed everything to make sure 300,000 more people didn't have to be buried at Dunkirk. Thanks for watching. Click the grunge icon to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Plus, check out all this cool stuff we know you'll love too.